Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of my Bigfoot sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sighting started for me back in 1972 as a Cub Scout on a camping trip in southeast Missouri. We had a couple of hours of some free time that afternoon, and a friend of mine and I decided to go exploring the woods, and the other kids decided they wanted to get some sticks and play Army. That's not something we were real interested in, so we decided to go walking through the woods. We probably went 20 minutes, 25 minutes into the woods, and we came across a fence, which we figured out was the borderline for the state park and private property. We crossed over the fence, and we went about another 20 minutes, I guess, and we were walking through a little clear area in the woods, and off to the right, my friend, he just stopped and just got real, you could just see it in his eyes that he was seeing something that scared him. When I looked in the same direction, there was a creature that you would have to say was probably, I'd have to say it was 7-8 foot tall. It was huge. It was hairy. All that came to our minds at the time was monster, because we weren't real, at that point, we weren't real familiar with a Bigfoot, Sasquatch animal. It was nothing that was over the news or anything like that. This thing walked about 10 feet and then it disappeared behind some brush. We didn't stick around to see if it was going to come out the other side or not. We turned around and we ran. We jumped that fence on a run. We got back to our camp within no time. These are fairly thick woods in southeast Missouri, a lot of rock formations, a lot of very wilderness woods. So a creature like that in that area doesn't surprise me now. Back then, it was a very scary situation. The next sighting that I had was about a year and a half later, and we were at a friend of mine's uncle's house just outside of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. He lived on a farm, had a big field outside his back door, and then a nice wooded, probably 1,500 acres of woods behind that. And we were sitting at the kitchen table on a Saturday night playing a game of Monopoly. There were 4 of us sitting there. The table was right in front of the window. There was a chair. The person was sitting there had their back to the window. That was my friend Gordon. I was sitting in the chair opposite him to where I could see out the window. His uncle was in the chair to my left. His brother was in the chair to my right. We're playing Monopoly. There is a yard light that was shining out into the backyard, somewhat into this field area. And we were sitting there playing, and I just happened to glance up, and I looked out, and I saw eye shine reflecting off of this porch light out in this field. I said something to his uncle. What's that? I just, being 12 years old, I just didn't, I was scared because it didn't look right. And he was like, "Oh, don't worry about that. That's just an owl up in a tree out there. No big deal." Okay. So we go back to playing our game. And I'd say probably 30 seconds later, his uncle just sat there and just got completely quiet. He looked at me, he looked at my friend, his nephew, and he's like, guys, I just thought of something. There's no tree out in that field for an owl to be on. And the minute he said that, we all went out the back door to see what was out there. And of course, by that time, there was nothing. We went out there with flashlights. We didn't see any footprints because it was dark. We didn't want to go too far away from the house. We had to leave the next morning, so we never did get a chance to see if there was any tracks out there, any footprints or any evidence like that. Plus, we were probably a little too scared to be looking for anything like that. Being 10, 12 years old, that's not something that you go exploring too much. I pretty much got away from the Bigfoot searching, hunting thing. I would do a lot of camping in the woods, did a lot of hiking, backpacking. Never had any more experiences at that time. 2015, I met a guy who we became friends over our mutual interest in Bigfoot. He took me to the Green Swamp area in Central Florida, where he had said he had had an experience a couple years before that. And we were in a wilderness campsite. It was off a trail. You couldn't get to it by vehicle. You had to hike a couple miles in. And that night, we heard a whooping. I know the sound of a barred owl. They're quick, short whoops. These were an extended, longer sound. We tried to tree knock. Nothing. About an hour later, we tried to tree knocking again and got a response off in the distance. The area that we were in, and at this time, there were no other people around where we had parked. There were no other vehicles. So the chances of this being somebody else doing the same thing was slim to none. The only thing we could figure out was it had to have been a Bigfoot, but without seeing anything, we couldn't say for sure. About, I'd say 3-4 months later, we decided to do a backpacking trip on the Florida Trail, going through, I guess, nearest town would be Inverness, Florida. This is about an hour or so north of Tampa. And we parked at the trailhead, and we hiked in about 3 miles. And he had a somewhat of a map of the area, and there was supposed to have been a wilderness campsite. We found it by mistake. It wasn't marked. You really couldn't tell it was a campsite unless you actually went off the trail and over to it and seen where other people had camped there. So we decided to camp there and check it out, see if we get any kind of activity. That trip, we didn't hear anything, didn't see anything. We went back the following week, and we had responses to tree knocks. What exactly, we don't know, couldn't say. Again, not too many people around the area there, fairly far off into the woods. You just have to guess on that. A year later, because when you're in Florida, you only have maybe 2-month windows time for doing this stuff because of the weather, bugs. You have to be out there when it's cool at night, cold at night, or otherwise the mosquitoes eat you up, the bugs eat you up. And the second time we were there, we didn't have any kind of experiences. It's nothing there except what they call live oak and pine trees. A few scattered palm trees. There's no, oak trees, maple trees, any of that stuff. So the areas are fairly open a lot with where the campsite was. You had some wood line a little ways away, but it's mainly pine trees around, scattered. And we went back the third time, which was in 2018 in February. And we went in, we camped, we hiked in on a Friday afternoon, set up camp. Now, when you're camping like that and you're in the the middle of the woods and it's 35 degrees at night, the last thing you want to do is in the middle of the night is have to climb out of your tent to relieve yourself. So we'd always have plastic bottles that we could use so we wouldn't have to get out of the tent. Now, I had been told, and my friend had been told, that spreading human urine around would keep away the coyotes. For some reason, they won't go around that. That night, or that next afternoon, Saturday afternoon, both of us did that. We walked around the campsite, just dumped our jugs around, and didn't think more of it. Got back to building a fire, doing our normal eating supper. Wintertime, it gets dark early. I guess it was probably about 7:30, 8 o'clock. We decided to let the fire go down, sit around, see if we could hear anything, see anything, have any kind of experiences. Nothing happened. We let the fire kind of go down a little bit. We decided to go ahead and go to bed, call it a night. Probably about 1 o'clock in the morning, somewhere around there. Both of us, our tents were about 20 feet apart, little 2-man, 3-man tents. And something woke us both up walking through the campsite. Now, the ground is just, it's hard ground because of wintertime, and there was just nothing but pine needles. There's really hardly any bare ground at all. You could feel whatever this was. At this time, we had no clue. You could feel it, the ground, as this thing walked. You could tell that it was bipedal. There was no evidence that it was a 4-legged animal walking through. The coyotes that we had heard earlier, completely quiet. No crickets. There was no sound of anything. We both kind of stuck our heads out of our tents, kind of like, what's going on? We got hit with there was an odor, rotten. I mean, it was just, it's hard to describe. People have said before and have tried to describe it. It was just something that made your nose turn up. It wasn't real strong, but it was there. This also made us a little more hesitant. I had a 9mm handgun on me. I always carry that when we went hiking, camping. There were small bear in the area, and you just never know. I took my gun, climbed out of the tent. My buddy, he climbed out of his tent, and we just kind of started looking around, built a fire up a little bit, and probably within about 2-3 minutes of climbing out of the tent, we saw the moon that night was not real bright, but there was a moon, so there was some ambient light coming down, through the tree canopy. We saw the shadow silhouette, I guess you'd call it, of something standing about 20 yards, if that far, away from the campsite. And it was just standing there. We weren't sure what we should do. It was almost like a standoff. And the next thing we know, this thing let out a roar, yell, scream. I don't know what you would want to call it, but you could feel the sound waves. It was like standing in front of a huge stack of speakers at a rock concert. You could just feel the sound waves going through you. It scared us, and I'm talking, we're grown adult men. This thing scared us like you wouldn't believe. We just started throwing wood onto this fire. We got behind a couple of trees because we didn't want this thing to see us. It was just, that's how scared we were. We stood there for a couple minutes. We started throwing pine logs onto a fire. I don't know if you've ever burnt pine wood before like that, but the pine sap, those things burn hot, they burn bright, and they burn long. These flames had to have been 8 feet off the ground, and by the time we had this fire going, it was 6-8 feet in diameter. And we didn't care how hot it was. We stayed as close as we could. And this thing, after it had yelled and screamed, basically we figured it was upset because we had spread human urine around, and it was his territory, her, couldn't tell at that point because how dark it was. But we're figuring it was just upset and mad because we had done that and we had invaded its territory. It turned around and walked away. I mean, almost like stomped away. It walked, and once it got out of view, we had no clue where it went. We didn't see it anymore that night, but we sat around that campfire. We didn't go back to bed. We didn't lay down. We sat around that campfire until daybreak. And as soon as that sun started coming up, we tore our tents down, tore everything, packed up. We didn't even do it very neatly. And we hightailed it out of that, down that trail and back to the trailhead. We hit that 3 miles. We probably hiked that in about, it had to have been less than a half an hour. That's how fast we were moving. We were scared like you wouldn't believe. We didn't go back to that spot for 2 years. The next time we went back there, we didn't have any more experiences there. We didn't have any tree knocking. We didn't have any vocalizations. All we heard was there was nothing anymore from that area. That year, we went down to the Cypress Swamp area down in southern Florida, down the Everglades area. We spent 2 trips there. The second trip, we had something off in the distance. You couldn't really tell exactly what it was because of the distance, but through the swamp grass and everything, there was something walking in the area that it was in. Couldn't have been human. There are a lot of alligators around there, a lot of snakes. There are issues with pythons there. We're pretty sure it was what they call a skunk ape in that area, but we weren't, couldn't say for sure. But we weren't there was no way of getting to that spot because it was just inaccessible for humans. 2021, we went back up to the Green Swamp area. Went back to the same wilderness campsite that we'd gone to our very first trip. My friend, he started having some stomach issues. So he was spending most of his time in his tent. I'm sitting around by the fire, and it was getting late, and I would say it couldn't have been more than 50 feet away from where we were camping. We heard snoring. And it was a snoring sound they weren't wild hog noises, wild boar. These were actual snoring sounds, and there was 2 different, you could tell it was from 2 different sources, right in the same area. With him not feeling good, he didn't want to get up out of his tent. Me being by myself, I didn't want to go checking it out at night in the dark. There was something that was there, and they were sleeping. It was snoring. We were the only people around. There was nobody else camping around us. There were no people riding their bikes down this trail. There was nothing. We hadn't seen anybody for 2 days. Something was snoring. I'm not sure when Bigfoot sleep. I have no clue if that's what it was, but we couldn't figure out. There was no other really explanation for what that could have been. There was no people sleeping in sleeping bags 50 feet out into the brush from where we were at. These are experiences I've had. Like I said, 2 of them were actual sites, 3 of them were sites, but with all the other evidence, I've been wanting to go back to those areas, but with all the stuff going on with the pandemic and everything, we never did get a chance to go back there. I just recently moved north. I'm in right at the Arkansas-Missouri state line in the Ozarks. Last year when I was up here visiting my daughter, we were sitting outside. It was late at night, 9, 10 o'clock at night. We were just sitting around, and there was a vocalization, I guess you would call it. It almost sounded like a howl. It almost sounded like the Sierra recording. Around us is nothing but acres and acres and acres of woods and fields. The nearest neighbor is quite a distance away. There's really nobody around here that even, I guess you would say, would be Bigfoot believers. So anytime I would ask people about it around here, they just kind of laugh it off and, that's all a myth. That's all, make believe. People are seeing bears. They're misidentifying bears. And I know for a fact this sound was not a bear. There's mountain lion around here, but those have a higher sound to them. There's nothing else around here. Like I said, there may be a few small black bear, but nothing that could have made that sound. And I haven't had a chance to get back out again. I want to get back out into the woods in that area and go see if I got to try to track down the property owners, get permission to go out onto their property there. My daughter said that a couple years ago they had there were a couple of vocalizations they'd heard out here that she's been here most of her life and she's never heard before. There are a couple of sightings in the county here that have been reported recently as 2017. I myself believe they're here, and I need to get back out and check those out. Those are basically all of my sightings, my experiences. I know they didn't go very long. There wasn't any extended sightings except for the one with the campground. So that's pretty much the experiences I've had.
My Bigfoot sightings all happened in Oklahoma. Before I get to my personal encounter, I will go back through, the history of the previous family members, encounters. It all started with my cousin Alex. He's 6 years younger than me, and he was around about 10. One time he just came out of the woods, and he was saying that he saw a monkey face. My uncle had thought he had seen an owl. It wasn't until years later that, I figured out that he had actually seen a Bigfoot. But no color or anything like that. He didn't say anything. He was just too afraid of it. Then, a couple of years later, my brother, I hear screaming in the woods out behind my house. And he is running out from the woods. And he said he seen a white beast. So I went and I grabbed a car jack. I figured, this is heavy. It'll do some damage. So, I go in there and I look around. I don't see anything. Then I go back to the front of the house and look across the road to see if our neighbor's, dog, who had a big white dog, it didn't look like he was tired or anything like that. So I'm pretty sure it wasn't that. And with the white Bigfoot, several members of my family and friends have actually seen the white Bigfoot. My best friend, he saw one, years and years later. He had just left my house, and then a couple of minutes later, he comes back in and says, "I'm staying for a while. I just saw a Bigfoot." I immediately just like, okay, let's go out and check. So we go out and check all over the place, don't see anything. But Roy mentioned that, it was light. And then the third time, was with my sister. My three youngest siblings have been adopted by my uncle. And they were actually 5 miles away, cross country. And she mentioned that, she had seen a white Bigfoot on her property. And she didn't tell me this until just this year. It just, blows my mind. And then my cousin Bobby, one time, his dogs are making a fuss, hollering, and something scratched his window, which his window was around about 6 feet high off the ground. And that only happened once. And then years later, his wife is going up the hill, coming back home. And a Bigfoot crosses the road, 2-lane road, crosses the road in 2 steps. It just blows my mind. And that was actually the last encounter before my own encounter. And then my other cousin, he was staying with my uncle, and he was crawling out of his window to smoke a cigarette. And he hears some thumping in the woods, and then he sees the Bigfoot walking out. He didn't give a color, but he immediately, goes back in the house. And then finally, I'm going to get you to my own encounter. Now, this is, there's been numerous times, before this, where I would see eye shine that was too large, for a deer or anything, or smells or stuff like that, to make me just wonder. And then one time, I was actually in my trailer. I opened the door, and there was a Bigfoot, the silhouette of a Bigfoot, walking across, the way. He didn't see me, thankfully. And there's a pole light at the front of the house, which, and then there was a building, small shed building, that made it to where, there was like an angle of light. And because, the sunlight was towards the Bigfoot's, back, I could only see it was only a silhouette from the waist up. But, I did notice, the tree that it had actually, walked past. It had split into 2 branches. So I walked down there and I actually checked how high it was, and it was roughly around about 8 foot height. And this thing was not a bear. It moved way too fast, standing straight up. And it also had no muzzle whatsoever. I mean, I didn't actually see any fur or anything, but it was all shadow. And it was just very quiet and fast. After that, I didn't normally drink, but, after that, I did have a beer after that. Just so that way I could process what I actually saw. Yeah. I'd still tell, my family members where I saw it at. And back in the 80s, there was thing that was on the news about a ranch that was just about a mile away from where we were located. It was called, the Murphy Monster. Some of the cows had been killed and had stampeded. And for a good month after this happened, you had ranch hands, going up behind their house, including, the hills right by our place. And now, if you try to look for a Murphy monster, you have to look really hard for it. I know a lot of the older members of the community still remember.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, booking hay bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Somebody going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Somebody going backwards in double time, getting to the soul and the tremolo Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, fried chicken, porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.